Everything my family said about Pastor Ted was wrong, right? I mean, the man I knew was honorable in so many ways, loving in others, perfect in every way. Everyone loved him. Well, not everyone. There were still plenty who didn't see his vision. Those who spoke against him, those who spread rumors. They only saw the faked and manipulated videos. They only listened to the slander. They didn't understand. They couldn't feel what I felt when I was there, standing beneath the tent, hearing his words thunder through the air. The way it felt to be a part of something greater than myself. My parents, my brother, they'd never understand. They called it manipulation. They said he was dangerous, but they weren't there. They didn't see what I saw in Pastor Ted's eyes every Sunday. The passion, the love, the truth that could lift your soul out of the muck of everyday life. They'd lost all that long before we moved to Bryant. They couldn't see beyond their grief, their anger. It all started when Grandpa died 2 years ago. And that's when everything changed. My parents, especially Dad, tried to tell me what to do, how to grieve, how to feel. And Brad, he didn't get it either. He was too wrapped up in his own world, his own doubts. But Pastor Ted, he understood me. He'd understood me even before Grandpa passed. Back when I first started coming to the tent services, he was the one who helped me get over the loss, told me there was a bigger plan, a greater purpose behind everything. I remember the first time I saw him, tall and powerful, with his black hair slicked back, his brown eyes intense as they scanned the crowd. His words cut through the heavy Alabama air like they were meant just for me. "There's something greater for you, son. You feel it, don't you? You feel the pull, the calling." And I did. I still do. I was excited when James, someone I went to school with but never really socialized with, joined our church. We'd had a few classes together back then. And I used to think he was cute in high school, but those days were long behind us. I wasn't some lovesick kid anymore, and James wasn't even on my radar. At least, not like that. Still, when I saw him walk into the tent one Sunday, it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. He wasn't with his family or anyone else, just him, walking in alone. At first, it was a major relief. Not that I needed validation that the church was normal, or that my beliefs were fine, but James brought a sense of familiarity and normalcy to everything. It made it easier to ignore the voices around me, the whispers from my family, even Brad's constant nagging. I enjoyed having him around at first. He'd stick around after the service, sometimes staying for the dinners Pastor Ted arranged for us. It felt good to be able to chat with someone who wasn't part of my family or already wrapped up in the church. We weren't friends, but there was a comfort in seeing a familiar face. But then I noticed something that started to eat away at me. Ted's eyes began to wander more toward James than they did toward me. At first, I brushed it off. Ted was a leader, always looking out for his flock, but it wasn't the same anymore. I could feel it. James started getting more attention, more one-on-one time, and I felt like I was being slowly shut out, left in the background. It didn't help that Brad's voice was constantly in the back of my mind, his words like a slow drip. He was convinced Ted was after my share of Grandpa's inheritance. "That man's just using you," Brad said over and over, his tone bitter. But I ignored him. He didn't understand what Ted had done for me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ted didn't want any part of me anymore. Not like before. The next day, I found myself pulling away. It wasn't intentional at first, but after seeing how Ted's attention had shifted, I thought maybe if I distanced myself, he'd notice. Ask what was wrong, and things would go back to normal. But he didn't seem to notice. At least, not right away. I spent the following days ignoring him as best I could, avoiding the tent whenever I thought Ted would be around, skipping out on any gatherings. When I couldn't avoid him, I stayed quiet, keeping my distance during conversations, offering curt answers when he asked me to do something. It was hard, so hard not to give in, but I needed him to see how I felt. I needed him to reach out. Finally, after days of being shut out, he pulled me aside after a service. "What's going on with you?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with frustration. "You've been acting strange, distant. It's like you're not even here anymore." I wanted to scream, to tell him everything, but his words cut through me. He told me I was acting crazy, and the more he spoke, and the more I started to realize maybe he was right. Was I making all this up? Was I imagining things? I had no proof that anything had really changed. No reason to doubt him other than this nagging feeling that wouldn't let go. Except for one thing. I knew for certain that James was after Ted's attention. He wanted it all for himself. I could see it in the way he looked at Ted during sermons, how he hung around after services, waiting for any scrap of time alone with him. It was obvious to me, even if no one else saw it. That night, I called my brother, something I hadn't done in weeks. I explained how mixed up I'd been lately, how everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. I expected Brad to lecture me, to say, "I told you so," but instead, his voice softened. "I love you," he said. "I understand. Just remember, you're not alone in this." After the service the next day, I couldn't take it anymore. My thoughts were racing, my chest tight with frustration. I'd spent the entire time watching Ted, watching James, seeing the way their interactions felt closer, more personal. It wasn't in my head. It couldn't be. I had to confront him. I waited until most people had cleared out, watching James as he lingered by the exit, chatting with a couple of the other church members. My heart pounded in my chest, but I pushed through the nerves and walked right up to him. "We need to talk?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked confused, raising an eyebrow. "What's up, Mason?" "I know what you're doing," I blurted out, the words tumbling from my mouth before I could stop them. "You're trying to get in Ted's head, trying to, I don't know, take his attention away from me." James stared at me for a moment, and then he shook his head. "You're acting crazy," he said, just like Ted had. But I didn't believe him. No, this time it was different. He was lying, obviously, trying to cover up what he was doing, trying to gain my trust. But then his expression shifted, something darker flashing in his eyes. He stepped closer, too close, and before I could react, his hand brushed my arm, his fingers lingering longer than they should have. "You don't have to be jealous, you know," he said, his voice lowering. "We could share him, or maybe you and I could be closer." I froze, my mind spinning. At first I didn't move. I mean, I'd always found James attractive. Back in high school, there were times when I couldn't take my eyes off him. And for a second, I almost gave in. His hand on my arm, his breath close to my ear. It felt like all those old feelings resurfacing. But then, I heard Ted's voice in the back of my mind, strong and commanding, like it always was during his sermons, guiding me, reminding me of what was right. "There's something greater for you, son. Don't lose sight of it." I pushed James away, my heart pounding. "Don't," I muttered, shaking my head, stepping back. I couldn't do this. Not now. Not ever. Not when Ted had done so much for me. James just smirked, his eyes cold. "Suit yourself," he said, turning away like nothing had happened, like it was all just a game to him. But for me, it was anything but. The following day, I went to my parents' house for dinner. It was just the three of us. Brad wasn't home, which made the tension that much worse. At first it was fine. Mom set the table and Dad asked how I'd been. We made small talk, but I could feel it. The undercurrent of disapproval. The way they eyed me like they were waiting for the right moment to strike. It didn't take long before they started pushing. Lightly at first, small jabs at my beliefs. They questioned Ted's teachings, questioned my commitment to the church. I tried to stay calm, to defend myself and Ted. But their words became sharper, the accusations harsher. It escalated quickly, their doubts turning into full-blown attacks on everything I believed in, everything Ted had done for me. They weren't just trying to convince me anymore. They were trying to break me. The way they spoke, it felt like they were trying to drive me out of their home with their lies. I stood up, ready to leave, but it felt like they weren't going to let me go. My hands trembled as I realized they were holding me there, not physically, but with their words, their anger. I didn't know how to get out. Just then, the door burst open, and Brad stormed in. His eyes locked onto mine, and he took one look at Mom and Dad before stepping between us. "This isn't the way," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're pushing him too far." Something in me snapped, and I bolted out the door. I didn't even wait for their reaction. I just ran. The only place I could think of was the tent, where Ted would be. Service would have ended over an hour ago, but I didn't care. I had to see him. I had to talk to him. I needed him to remind me of the truth. When I got to the tent, the night was eerily quiet. The lights were still on inside, casting long shadows across the dirt. My heart pounded as I made my way inside. Ted hadn't come looking for me, and now I was starting to understand why. I found him alone with James. At first, I thought they were... I don't know what I thought. Ted was standing too close, his hand on James's shoulder, his eyes locked onto his. The way they moved, it looked like they were about to, until I saw the change. Ted's body began to contort, his skin twisting and cracking like the earth itself was breaking apart. His eyes turned dark, hollow, as his mouth opened wide, wider than humanly possible. Before I could scream, before I could do anything, Ted transformed into something hideous. A creature I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. A demon. He was sucking the very essence from James, drawing something out of him that I couldn't even comprehend. I ran forward, panic gripping me, and grabbed James, trying to pull him free from Ted's grasp. But Ted, or whatever he was now, was too strong. My hand slipped, and I stumbled back, horrified at the monster I'd once trusted with my soul. Just then, the door to the tent flew open. Brad stood there, his face pale but determined, holding a gun in his hand. His eyes flicked between me and the demon that was once Ted. The creature hissed, its twisted face full of malice, but the sight of the gun made it pause. For the first time, I saw fear in Ted's eyes, or what was left of them. With a final screech, the demon flapped its grotesque wings and flew off into the night, leaving nothing but the echoes of its inhuman scream behind. Brad lowered the gun, his eyes meeting mine once again. We were in time to save James, though he would never be the same again. The look in his eyes, haunted, distant, was a reminder of what he'd been through. He tried to apologize for how he had acted, stammering out words about how sorry he was, how he didn't know what had come over him, but we all knew. We had been under some kind of possession, some dark influence. James wasn't to blame. None of us were. My brother, Brad, saved me in more ways than one that night. I owed him more than I could ever express, not just for pulling me out of that tent, or for standing up to the demon that had worn Ted's face, but for being there, for seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself clearly. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life being thankful for him, and for a while, life returned to something like normal. A few weeks passed, as things settled into a routine. The world didn't stop turning just because we had come face to face with something unspeakable. But I wasn't the same. I couldn't be. I had to be better. Physically, mentally. I worked harder than I ever had before, pushing myself every day. I couldn't let something like Ted back into my life. Not ever again. But I knew deep down I'd never let Ted go peacefully, and neither would Brad. We didn't talk much about what had happened in that tent. It hung between us, unspoken but ever present. My parents thought we were healing, moving on, but they didn't understand. They hadn't seen what we'd seen. They didn't feel the pull of unfinished business, which is why a few months later, Brad and I found ourselves far from Bryant. We were entirely different people as we stood outside of the old, empty tent church on the outskirts of Albuquerque. The air was dry, the sky a deep orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. It looked the same as the one back home, the same rows of folding chairs, the same worn fabric of the tent, flapping in the wind, the same sense of something wrong beneath the surface. We weren't the same people who had walked away from Ted the first time. We were stronger now, sharper, ready. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. We had come here for a reason. It was time to reunite with an old friend.